So we are going to record this and put this meeting on YouTube. So, if we can share it with people at a later time. So, John, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you. And from now on, it's your meeting.
Thank you, Bill. Hopefully we'll handle the technical challenges properly at this end. Thanks so much for this opportunity to have this forum, and we owe a lot to Bill here, who's preserving a lot of history that I think would otherwise be lost as time goes on, and the war in particular drifts away into distant time. I think it's kind of important we preserve some of those thoughts, particularly in this day and age where I think Norway in particular and the American friendship is somewhat dependent on our longstanding cultural ties. So I think this is, good for everyone to sort of go through some of these things. The story we're going to talk about today about the 99th is a pretty remarkable story, and I think still largely unknown. We've got a really gifted writer, Antoni Pisani, who's going to do most of the discussion on the 99th. And we've been on a quest to try to understand my father-in-law's life a lot more. Hans Larsen was in the 99th. I want to do a little spoiler alert here in the beginning and say that the story does have a happy ending. All right. So he is a whaler in the Norwegian whaling fleet before the war. He ends up in New York and ends up in the U.S. Army. All right. And from that, he then ends up into a special group called the 99th Battalion, which was a Norwegian-speaking battalion. And I'll let Antonio explain a lot of the dynamics behind this unit and the politics and some of the other things going on. The unit would be sort of really well-trained mountain troops, if you would. Because they're sort of a really special unit, they find themselves throughout the war in some really difficult places. They're sort of, I think, a group that gets a troubleshooting assignment from time to time. And that means some real serious fighting. With my father-in-law, we don't know too much because he was in some serious action and very reluctant to talk about it. So we've been working with Antonio to try to figure out a little bit more about fill in the blanks, if you would. As I say, the happy ending is the 99th returns to Norway as part of the liberation. And my father-in-law actually gets to liberate his own hometown, which is kind of a happy story, 5 or 6 years after he had left with the whaling fleet. So I'm going to let Antonio take us through sort of the backdrop of the 99th. And from time to time, we'd like to interject some of our family stories about Hans and what we know. Antonio, could you start your presentation?
Sure. First, I want to say thanks, Bill, John, for having me. It is as John just told you. We wanted to try to how should I put it? Recreate or find as much details as we could about John's father-in-law, Hans A. Larson, and sort of go through the story of the 99 through, looking for his footprints, really. That is sort of the backdrop. Hans was a sailor from Tønsberg in Norway. A pretty, normal, average Norwegian boy. Westfall, where he came from, was a typical, we call it a whaling community, really. A lot of boys, they went to sea quite early. And you have to correct me, John, if I'm going wrong on the details on his background, but he grew up on the family farm Bjørkli in Stokke outside of Tønsberg, which is on the southeast coast of Norway. His parents were Hans and Ragna, and he had 11 siblings, and among those was a twin sister called Ragna.
I might interject here. Some of the family is listening in right now from
Yeah,
Norway.
please comment.
And I don't know, Rita, did you want to say something a little bit about the family, maybe?
Really, Antoni covered the basics, that he grew up on the farm called Bjerke in Stokke. You know, he was near the youngest. He was the fourth from the youngest. Yeah, he basically, you know, kind of had a fairly normal life in Norway at that point.
Yeah. I don't know much about his education. In his enlistment papers, he says he had 1 year of high school. We don't have high school in Norway, so it might be what we call gymnasium or what they're aiming at. Or yeah, that's what I know. He probably went to sea when he was what we landed on, John, around his 20s.
Well, I think he's rather young. He's younger than that.
He's younger than, he's a teenager, and I'm his daughter, Helen. And he was a teenager, and after he was confirmed, he did join in. And one of the things I heard was that one of his first voyages was with 3 of his brothers, so that he actually had people with him that he really knew well before he really started doing this full time.
Yeah.
But he was a teenager, I believe.
Yeah, he has at least, I think, 7 trips to the Antarctic before the war with the whaling fleet. So he starts pretty young.
Yeah.
And I think that's, yeah. I mean, what's interesting here, I think, is these Norwegian seamen are all well trained. They're used to dangerous jobs, and they're used to taking orders. So they become, I think, later very good soldiers.
Yeah, and he already at this age, he was an important contributor to his family's economy, I assume. And well, the world is changing for Hans in September 1939. He's going on to the Antarctic with the whaling fleet, as he has done before on the fall of 1939. But on 1st September, as we all know, the war started. So a month later, he goes to sea, and that's the last time he sees his parents and his sisters and brothers in Norway for a long time. We all know Germany attacked Norway. Hans was not alone. There was a huge amount of sailors out at sea. Norway was a what do you call it, a superpower when it comes to the maritime. Well, the fishing industry, the shipping part, they were leading force in the world at that time. A large group of these ships were out at sea and escaped the German forces. So a lot of these boats, especially the boats that were coming from the Antarctic, the whaling fleet that came home from that year's season and returned, they ended up in South America, and Hans ended up in New York with his ship. On April 12th, he landed in New York. All of these sailors, they were in a sort of a dilemma, what to do. A lot of the men, they went ashore right away. Some had already been torpedoed and survived and came into New York. We found the timeline, or we tried to recreate the timeline of Hans in the following period. The thing is that he's returning to sea quite soon. Already in May, he's returning to sea, and is back again in New York in August. But then he is drafted in U.S. Army and that is fall of 1940. That's quite interesting because he's not yet an American citizen. He is a Norwegian citizen, and he's still unemployed, as you can see from that card. So it's quite interesting, and this is also the start of what should I call it, a fight between Norwegian and American government regarding these sailors, because both wanted them in their forces, really. The Norwegian government, they really needed the sailors to man the merchant fleet. They were an important part for the Norwegian war. Yeah, an important part in fighting the Germans. So you had a story there, John, about after Hans got a job, what happened on that his workplace.
Yeah, this is where the story gets a little awkward. And I think one of the reasons that it's not true just for my father-in-law Hans, but a lot of the sailors end up being arrested. And then, and in case with my father-in-law, he's ashore, he's off the ship. You notice the one slide, December 24th, 1942, he arrives in New York. That's Christmas Eve, and his brother, Nils, has a motorboat. He comes out to New York Harbor and takes Hans ashore. And then when they come back a day or so later after this party, the ship, which is the Geisha, has sailed. And my father-in-law could not find out where it had gone. So now the ship has sailed with all of his main personal belongings. So his brother had told him, look, at that time, there were more Norwegians in Brooklyn than Oslo at the time. And the local shipyards, basically that was the main language, was Norwegian. So he went to work in a shipyard for several weeks. And but by February, he's in the US Army, as you can see. And what happens is he heard his name over the loudspeaker, went to the office at the shipyard and was arrested. At least that's the story Nils, his brother, told me. And my father-in-law was always very reluctant to talk about this chapter in his life. And they ended up in Rikers Island, which is a pretty infamous prison in New York. And then the Norwegian consulate, and my father-in-law had a lifelong dislike for Norwegian diplomats. The Norwegian consulate came down and offered him and the other sailors the opportunity to join the American Army or spend the war in prison. And they just thought it was some kind of hype, so they blew him off. And a week later, the consulate came back and everyone joined the US Army. So that must be February 10th, 1943. All right. So as it is, whenever the story of the 99th is told, there's always this a bit of a stigma about the sailors. But the sailors, again, these are pretty rugged guys used to traveling, particularly the whalers in the Antarctic, and used to doing dangerous jobs and following orders. So in terms of material for a unit, I mean, the sailors were sought after, all right? But they were also quite valuable, as Antoni said, on the shipping, which was Norway's main income during the war. So at any rate, yeah, this piece is what part my father-in-law was. I had to hear this from his brother, Nils. Now, some of the other family may have heard other versions, but that's the one I heard.
Yeah, it is quite interesting, John, in terms of other sailors in the battalion have told. There was another guy that also told about there was a raid, or if you could call it that, on his workplace. He was working at a factory in Brooklyn, and it is quite interesting in terms of that tug of war between American and Norwegian governments in terms of the sailors. Here's an interesting document. It's a letter from Colonel Kleinberg. He was a military attaché at the embassy in Washington. And this is just a part of it, but as you see, he is not, he doesn't want Norwegian sailors to escape to U.S. Army. That's quite, his wording is quite interesting. Another interesting thing about this is the date of this letter. It's in July 23rd. A few days earlier on the conference in London, the subject of the Norwegian battalion comes up, and everybody in the government is taken by surprise by the news that the Americans are establishing or activating a ethnic Norwegian infantry unit. And so the ambassador gets he gets the job of finding out what are the Americans up to. So this is probably a result of that, finding out job, to be honest. And you can see that they already are really worried about, the sailors. So the interesting part is I believe this letter was put in the drawer, to be honest, because the War Department never did anything about it. There was several hundred sailors in the 99th Infantry Battalion. I don't know if I should go quickly through the establishing of the battalion, but it was I can see that the discussions about establishing an ethnic Norwegian battalion started in spring of 1942. There's a discussion in the War Department. Some are against the idea, others are not, and it's hard to find out exactly who was the mastermind behind the idea or the motivation, but we do get a impression. I found a document, a memo that was signed by Franklin D. Roosevelt, or not signed, it was just said FDR. And he was quite clear that the battalion was established because of a political, motivated, really. This is my idea or my theory. I can't be 100% sure, but it seems that was the backdrop. I have not succeeded in finding out who was the person behind the idea. It could be Olav, it could be Marta or Roosevelt himself. I don't know really, but it would be interesting if anyone had any input on that. But feel free to send a question or input in the chat, or just interrupt me as well. When Hans joins the battalion, they have already moved to Camp Hale and started their training, ski training. John, you want to fill in a little bit about how Hans felt about the training? And
this is the kind of stuff he loved to do: the skiing, the hiking. The time out in the Rockies there was really quite enjoyable for him. He also thought the American equipment he had, the skis and the equipment, the sleeping bags, everything else was really first rate, quality stuff. And the sleeping bag in particular, he would speak well of throughout the war. It was remarkably, he was a man who could sleep well through real dangerous situations. And even during the Battle of the Bulge, he would praise his sleeping bag for keeping him warm during the battle. So, but the time in the Rockies was quite good. Back in the 1980s, they would have a reunion out there, but there was nothing left of the camp. But it was a very sentimental time for them to all gather back, and they had quite a reunion. But the camp, I think now there may be a monument there to their training.
Yep. The ski training didn't get started really before actually in January 43. They had some problems getting their equipment ready and also ski instructors. So by late January, they were, finally getting really, time to go out on hikes and exercises. One thing that is quite interesting is that it's all through this period, it's quite obvious that it is Norway that is the mission, or that's why they're training. They're going to Norway. Everybody believed that. So it is also in the media. They get a lot of attention. Here's a photograph from where President Roosevelt is reviewing the battalion in Easter of 43. That was on newsreels, and they had a lot of attention in the US media. So it was really open out there that these guys are going to Norway. But in summer of 43, some things start to happen that is sort of a little bit strange, to be honest. Suddenly, they decide to replace the commanding officer, or Harold D. Hansen, who was Norwegian. He was born in Cleveland, but he had spent his childhood in Norway, so he spoke Norwegian and was really, athletic and knew how to ski, and they were, replacing him with a professional old army colonel from the cavalry that couldn't ski or couldn't speak Norwegian, and that was odd signals, to be honest. And one of the guys wrote that the men were surprised and angry about this change. This was in summer of 43. What also happens in that period is that OSS comes in and takes out quite a good chunk of men from the battalion. But still, in September of 43, they leave. They travel to New York and board the SS Mexico and across the Atlantic to England. The question about where are they going are lingering in the air, really. The battalion supply officer later wrote that they had turned in all their equipment that was related to winter warfare, or everything that they trained with. So things are a little bit odd. Let's see, there's a question there.
Yeah, I think just to comment, I think, William Colby, the director of the CIA, was in the OSS and parachuted into Norway at the end of the war. So maybe some of those volunteers ended up working with him.
They sure did.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's true. They pulled some of the top guys they were all a very physically fit unit, but some of them were seen even more, ready for that type of combat. And some of my father-in-law's friends were selected for that OSS.
Yeah. That part about the other guys, Reaper group is quite known. But for the men that was, remaining in the battalion, it was a bit odd. It was the signals were, mixed signals, to be honest, about what's our mission going to be. So they're in England and they're continuing their training through the winter of 43 into 44. And they arrive in Scotland, and then we move down to Tidworth in England. And during springtime, they also move up to Wales. And I think it's in July. And also at this time, they get an invitation from BBC to come and send messages to Norway. Some of the guys are told this, and to send messages to Norway that we're coming to liberate you and stuff like that. So some have raised, the theory that the battalion was part of a bigger scheme to to sort of fool the Germans of where the invasion would be. I haven't found anything that sort of clearly states that, but it might have well been. I'm not sure.
Well, they came to England without any winter equipment, without her skis or any of that stuff. So it was pretty clear that that was not Norway invasion was not part of the deal, but that wasn't widely known.
Are you looking at this? Oh,
Yeah, it is.
you don't care about Norway, except you do want to go.
Somebody has to mute their. Somebody's not muted. I can hear a television. Okay, but the thing is, I've talked to quite a few of the men, and they've never been really, really clear about if they were surprised, surprised about, later on when the message about or the news about the D-Day invasion came. So it's very difficult to say what they were thinking while they were in England and training, and if they still believed it would be Norway. But I think they sort of lost the faith, to be honest, after a while. To try to trace
Larsen?
Hans's story. Hans was in D Company. He was in 2nd Platoon. He was in machine guns, and we know that he was a Jeep driver, and we know that he was in 2nd section of 2nd Platoon, or that would be 2nd Squad. His commander was Windholst, and his second in command, Lindholm. Yeah, well, I talked a little bit about that. It must have been, in some part, a surprise. We talked a little bit about that, John, in terms of going from training in the mountains, commando raids, stuff like that, and being a independent unit, and then suddenly you have to sort of, you're going into a battlefield with divisions and regiments and corps, armies, and you're suddenly just a small brick, and I don't know what that would, what they were thinking about the prospects of, getting through that alive. I know some of the men were happy that they didn't go to Norway because they thought they would be slaughtered going into Norway. But I haven't read anyone sort of, how do you say, problemize or being interested in that question about, they were actually trained in winter combat, and they ended up in France where there was a heat wave and there was no mountain in sight. It is, quite a sort of a fish out of water thing. So there's a new reality. It's not Norway, it's Normandy. We could make a joke about somebody maybe not spelling it right. Okay, so now they're crossing the channel. There's been a lot of talk about the 99th when they landed in Normandy. And the thing is that it's not an easy question to answer because it depends on which boat you were on. Actually, there were 4 boats shipping them over. or ships is maybe the right term. The main group went over on the SS John Henry, and A company on one boat or one ship, and so was B company, and there was one platoon of C company that went over as well.
Antonio, I have a question.
Yeah.
They boarded Plymouth on June 11th and they disembarked on June 22nd. That's an awful slow trip across the English Channel.
At sea.
Yeah. Could you explain why it took so long?
Yeah, I'll
If you get to that, yeah.
yeah. Some of these boats, I think maybe one of them made it across without. No, I think actually all of them were. There was a big storm in the English Channel that destroyed quite a bit of the Mulberry, the harbor or the artificial harbor that was made in Normandy, and that made things difficult for the landings. So that is why some of these boats or ships took so long. Worst was 3rd Platoon in C Company. They boarded the ship on this June 16th, and then didn't disembark until June 26th. Also, that's 10 days. And usually it's a couple of hours, maybe more, 3 hours. Is it? Yeah, so it's that's the explanation, Bill.
Yes. Okay.
This photograph is actually taken on board one of the Liberty ships, all of them. So that's A company. Same here as well. The photograph to the left here is an actual photograph from A company. They landed in the evening, so they're probably in the process of preparing to get ashore. You can see that the sun is quite low. It's probably late evening, late afternoon. There's one slide missing here, but they landed on Ove Beach, and they gathered in a town called Colombiers, not far from the coast, and that's where they teamed up with a couple of ranger units, and they waited for the last part of the battalion to arrive. And it was not until June 29th that they moved on to Sherberg. Sherberg at this time was, I think it was 28th that Sherberg fell. And the 99 came in the day after, but as I told John, I don't think it was a safe place to be. There was a lot of snipers. Quite a few of the men have told about sniper hunts in the streets of Sherberg. But for the most part, the battalion had guard missions or patrol missions in town, guarding the installations, the harbor. There was one unpleasant task that the medics were given. That was to support the graves registration units to gather dead bodies in the streets. So that was this Gunderson. He later left the battalion, and according to one of the officers, that was because of it has such an impact on him to be leading that work. So he really didn't handle that. On the picture on the right here is, on the top is actually a fort. It's called Fort de Roule, and D company, Hans's company, was guarding this installation. And a funny story here is that inside of this mountain, they found a big stash of cognac and wine and, you know, whatever you that the Germans had, you know, stacked there. And the men in D Company tried to keep this a secret for the officers, to keep it to themselves. But they got busted when one of the officers wanted to have a cup of coffee, and the cook in D Company had filled all the water tanks with cognac, so they were busted. Another thing inside of this mountain, they found what do you call it, canned foods, is that from Norway, and that really angered quite a few of the men, seeing that the Germans had looted Norway and food had ended up in German army. That wasn't taken very well. The battalion sort of still, you know, the fighting still goes on. I mean, the bridgehead in Normandy is still not very big, so the fighting is going on inland, but the battalion is sort of sitting there and waiting, and quite a few of the men were sort of impatient to get on with the action. But not much is really happening before the breakout starts of the bridgehead, what's called the Operation Cobra, in late July. And that's when this is the area where they patrolled. And they were quite, you know, frustrated, some of them. Here's some of the men. Yeah, you can read it for yourself, but the fun one, you know, is Alan Lindholm. He's on the picture. There was a rumor of him being wounded. His mother wrote him and was very worried, and he wrote back and said the only way that could happen would be if I stuck myself with a pin or something. And it says a few of the guys were really, you know, eager to get into combat, whilst others were, you know, happy that, you know, just to stay put. So I haven't managed to see if there was a different view held among the sailors compared to the other men in the battalion. I haven't seen that. But things do happen, and on August 7th, they are taken to a town called Limesnil Herman, you see up here, and they start to prepare for a mission together with second and fifth Ranger battalions, but that mission is cancelled due to a German counterattack down by Mortain. I don't know if you know this story in detail, but the Germans tried to split American forces. So there was really heavy fighting, and the 99th was put on alert and also sent down to, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Brisay or and to support the American forces down by Mortain. And what happens on the way is that they get their sort of a baptism of fire, in a way. They get the transport was going on at night, and they were driving in columns, the trucks, and there were German planes coming over and bombing them. So that was the first big scare that they had. But when they come down to Mortain, things have settled down, and yeah, they sort of missed the action once again. I want to say a little bit about the sailors at the front. Quite a few of these men had quite a bit of an accent, is that what you call it? And they didn't speak English very well. When they moved into the position coming next, when they joined the 2nd Armored Division, there's episode where the men were moving into position at night, and the Norwegians started to swear, and while they were digging, and having an American unit right by, they thought it was Germans, that was digging. So everything was, they aimed their guns and everything, and there was just just before they fired, that they would realize that these were Americans, or American forces. So it's a fun thing now, but it is, it could have been a tragedy, really. And later in the war, they do get trouble with the language, with accents. A little tidbit: this truck, you can see on the door, says "homeless wives." I don't know. I tried to find out what wives means, and it seems that is it is used in the among sailors. I'm not an English person, but is the wife, John, is wife used on something else? Is it something I'm missing?
Waifs.
Waifs.
Yeah, they're homeless children. I mean, orphans.
Orphans.
Yeah.
Okay.
Orphan would be a better term.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think they definitely felt like orphans, some of those sailors at this point, I'm sure. or motherless children. Yeah, I've not heard this piece before, but I can understand it. I mean,
Yeah, and then they're teaming up with the 2nd Armored Division, and now things start to happen. They're training a few days about setting up roadblocks and radio communication with tanks and infantry. And the big race across France is starting. Let me see.
Yeah, my father-in-law had said that at this point they were taken off the line for a while, and they brought down to show a new weapon, a bazooka. And so they were first being exposed to this and trained with this, which I guess they began.
That
to
might
carry
have been
that.
up here when they were with the Rangers.
Okay.
But they started to. Well, you might be right. I have to check that, John. The timing of that. I read that they started to work with the bazooka, but I have to check the dates. But you're correct, it was in this period, yeah. What happens is that this big German counterattack fails, and the Germans start to flee this way. Can you see the red dot? They start to flee. That would be eastwards and towards Calais, and British forces are coming down here, and American coming up here, and to sort of a pinch movement to cut off the Germans fleeing. The brass wants to make another encirclement. They want to send forces, even a bigger encirclement, a second hook they call it, and the 19th Corps, 2nd Armored, and the 99th are given that mission. So the next couple of days they ride like crazy with trucks and tanks, and they towards Paris, and they cut up north about this area here, up towards a town called Elbeuf. What they wanted to achieve was to cut off the forces, but they also wanted to press them as long north as possible, because the Seine River that runs here, it's difficult to see, was wider the closer to the coast you got. So they wanted to avoid them fleeing across the river. So we can imagine, you know, Hans was driving his Jeep. And then the thing was they were driving at night, and they were at daytime they'd set up roadblocks. So this goes on for 3-4 days, and during this period there's also a really nasty accident in Hans's Hans's company. A truck runs over a mine, and one of the guards whose responsibility to pull these mines off the road, he doesn't pull it all the way off the road, and then one of the wheels get onto the mine and it blows up. Hans's company commander is seriously wounded, Winholst, and the younger Lindholm is taking over the company. The sailor Trygve Alsaker from Bergen, he was on the Nordnes when he was torpedoed. He survived that, but he was killed there. A sad story. Here you see one of those roadblocks. There was a race to capture as many Germans as possible at this point. Okay, but now something you want to add, John? Should I speed up or?
Yeah, I mean, it's good. We can interject a little bit here. My father-in-law develops even before the war, when he was a whaler, he was earning very good money. The fact that was the Depression. And he bought his first couple of cars in Norway. Later, he gets this Jeep, and he has like a lifelong fondness for vehicles. And he generally names most of his cars French women names, as I remember.
Not always. I remember. One was named Anna Maria.
Oh, Anna Maria. So he has a real love of these, but the Jeep and him will play, we'll talk about this later, but coming ashore in Normandy, he has to rig a special snorkel on the Jeep so they can drive through the sea up onto the beach. And he's fussing a lot with that, and he gets it right, and he gets through the surf, and then he has to get it off before it overheats. And later, one of the things, the trouble about the Jeep is it can overheat when it's under a heavy load. And we'll talk about that a little later, because that plays a big role in his life. But he had this real fascination with the vehicles, and I think it starts here.
Do you know what his Jeep was named in?
You know, that's a good question.
That I don't know.
Yeah. But anytime we'd see a Jeep things like that, I had a friend who had an antique Jeep, and he just loved to look at it and tinker with it. And it's yeah, I'm sure it had a good name, maybe one that had special meaning.
It probably started with D. It probably started with D, the letter D, since he was in D company.
D company, yeah.
Concha.
Antonio, I have a
Yeah.
quick question. I noticed some of those pictures of the soldiers were very high quality. Were they, who took them?
These ones?
Yes, that's a
These are-
pretty high quality picture.
Yeah.
Was that
this is a-
taken by a special unit, or were these just?
It's taken. I found it in one of the veterans' photo album.
Because
And-
it's not a brownie picture. This is something that's using a professional quality. It looks like a professional quality camera.
Yeah, in this photo album, there was quite a few of those photographs. But he has written. He's even named a few of the men in some of the photographs. So, yeah, the places, but. I don't have the copyright owner, or I don't have any idea
Okay.
who the photographer is. I agree, they're really high quality. There's a couple of them coming up later as well. A really interesting one. I'll show you. But yeah, I would love to know who took these pictures. This one is supposedly taken down by Mortason Place, and this one is close to Elbeuf, where we are going now.
Okay.
Okay, so now we have caught up with the Germans. You know, the Seine River is in front of us, and Elbeuf, which is a medium-sized city, or well, yeah, we probably can't say city. You can see on these bridges across the Seine, they were knocked out. The Allied planes had knocked them out, so the Germans didn't have any possibility to cross over them at all. The Germans left their tanks and tried to get on ferries. Some tried to get tanks on ferries, and there were panic among the German troops. So the thing is that the battalion, who has now been sort of not in reserve, but you know, they've not been, you know, up ahead, get their first sort of sharp mission, to be honest. They get to the responsibility to lead going into town, and they get support from tanks from 66th Armored, or is it 67th? I don't recall, 66 or 67 tank or armored regiment. So they started moving in. You can see on the side, this is the actual drawing or the maps from back then. This is the photograph I was talking about, Bill. Really good quality. Here you can see the soldiers in the night coming down towards the town. A little anecdote about this photograph is that the guy on the Jeep under the tree is later killed that day. I only have the person who's written these things in that photo album as source on that one. But as soon as well, one thing that happens before, I wanted to take that before. One thing that happens before they get into town is that they have to go across a railroad line, and on that bridge, it's full of wrecks. So there's no possibility for the tanks, the supporting tanks, to follow them into town. So Colonel Turner has to make a decision if they should go in or if they should wait to get, you know, to clear the bridge. So he decides they go in town because they don't think there's any tanks in town, so they go in. And as soon as they get in, things start to happen. German artillery and also snipers and even German tanks are now rolling in the streets. There's a couple of hours here where it's pretty shady, to be honest. It seems that some of the men have told about them hiding in the basements due to the tanks, the German tanks. Others have told about knocking out tanks. But there's quite a bit of fighting going on in the streets. One interesting thing is that you can see the boy in the picture on the right. A few of the men told about how the French were coming out in the street with bottles of wine and wanted to celebrate in the middle of battle. Here's also a thing about the let's see, the D company, or Hans company. they set up machine guns on the main streets, and they were sort of firing down the streets to support the rifle companies. And Ove, who's Hans's nephew, told me that during this, Hans was driving and getting ammunition with his Jeep. And one of the men from the machine gun team was coming running back to him and laughing. And Hans was wondering, why are you laughing in the middle of battle? And that was that they had hit a German tank, and the tank driver had thought it was really heavy shelling. It was only the machine guns, but in panic, they driven into a house, and the crew had just split. So one of those stories. But there were several different stories about, you know, how these first moments in battle were. Some men froze. Other men did silly things, like Colonel Hansen, not Major Hansen. He stood out in the street firing with his handgun on tanks, which is pretty silly. So I would imagine it's typical inexperienced forces doing things like that. Either stupid bravery that is sort of risking your life for very, very little, and some people freezing. So, but in the afternoon, things settle down. The next day, if you see on one of these pictures, you can see a church tower, the church here. The thing is that during this fighting, Turner comes across two men that says that the doors for the church are locked. They wanted to go up and check if there was any men, Germans in the tower. And Turner said, just leave it, and they moved on. That was one mistake they did. The other mistake was, I think it was Hansen who decided where to put the headquarters, and they pick a big building that was easily to spot from the church tower. And what happens next morning is that, well, I've lost a slide here, I see, is that the battalion headquarters is bombed. And it's because of there's 2 or 3 Germans in the church tower that's, you know, radioing in the activity at the headquarters. So the battalion commander Turner is now wounded seriously, and he's out. Lindholm, who took over in Hans's company, who took over after Winholst, he is killed. And so it's a when they get out of Elbaf, it's a really new, you know, they lost a lot of men, officers. So it's, if you try to sort of look at what did really happen in Elbaf, what I notice is that there's a lot of mistakes done by the officers. One can't blame them really. There was the first time they were in combat. So, but a lot of men and a lot of wounded was the result after Elbaf. Are people hanging on, or am I too detailed, or?
No, keep going.
Thanks, Rolf. So now there's a new situation. Harold Hansen is back in command. You can see Harold Hansen in the middle here. On this picture, it seems like they've been out looting something. I wonder what he has under his jacket. He wasn't that big. So he's hiding something. On his left, you can see Anshan, who was battalion, let's see, he was the operations officer, if I'm not, yeah, correct, yeah. And on the right, there's, I think it's Lester Carlson, who was a motor pool officer. One thing that Hansen had to solve now, because he had lost his, well, he is now battalion commander, and he needed a new second in command or executive officer. So he had to make a decision. So that's something that he has on his mind. And Ansjön was really keen on that position. And but he takes his time to make that decision, Hansen. But now they are heading for Paris, but sadly for the men, they're not going to Paris. They are turning north, crossing the Seine River, continuing north in France. At this point, they're losing contact with Second Armored. They also being held up because they'll actually, they don't have any more fuel. So I think that was in Bray-sur-Somme. They were stuck for a day or two. I don't recall. But at 20:30 on September 4th, they crossed the border into Belgium at La Glanière. That's my best French. So this is a sort of a quiet period. They are greeted like heroes, you know, liberators all the way through here. Most of the men have said that the French were sort of a little, well, not hostile, but compared to the Belgians, the Belgians were really, you know, there were flowers everywhere when they came into Mons in early September. People were going crazy. Mons is this town. Valenciennes is on the French side. They are hurriedly, you know, transported to Valenciennes because of a First Army headquarters was here, and there were some stragglers in the forests around Valenciennes. I don't know how I pronounce that, but and the 99th had a period there as well, and combing the forests, and they managed to get even another officer wounded in an accident as well. So they're really, yeah, they have problems, you know, losing a lot of people, a lot of officers and soldiers as well. Okay, 12th of September. We are getting close to what is called Operation Market Garden. There's really optimism in the Allied, you know, among the Allied officers. I assume most of you know about Operation Market Garden and the effort to end the war before Christmas. And at that point, the 99th get a new mission together with Second Armored. They are down by Maastricht, not up by oh, I forget. They're not a part of the Market Garden operation. Just to be precise on that, they get the mission to clear an island. The island, an island between the Meuse River and the Wilhelmswart Canal. You can see on the picture how there was sort of small islands, you know, forming, and it widens up when you get further north. But they needed to clear that to protect one of the flanks, and the 99th, together with the tanks from Second Armored, got a mission to clear that. You can see down here there was one bridge standing down here, and there was another bridge a bit up further north that was you couldn't get tanks across. It was only men that could get across. So they sent tanks down here, and it was C Company together with tanks that got that job to go down and then move up along towards the other bridge. to meet up. The rest of the battalion was waiting on the west side, up by that, that bridge that was partly blown out, to move over as soon as that bridgehead was secured on the other side. This is the bridge that here the rest of the battalion were waiting, and they couldn't get tanks across, so they came up this way instead. Yeah, there was a lot of going on. There was artillery. I can't go into all the details, but still new casualties. They do get over most of the infantry or the rifle companies. One thing I've been thinking about here is that I know there was two brothers, or there were several brothers in the battalion, but I know that one of them, they were on each side of the canal at this point. It must have been nerve-wracking to know that your brother is, stuck in a really tight spot on the other side, and you couldn't be able to get over to help him. But they do get across, and they continue north. There's a lot of things going on as they move north. There was a lot of snipers, and also medics were targeted by German forces. It turned into a really brutal fight. There's a lot of small stories about how the Germans didn't want it to surrender. Yeah, a lot of gruesome details. I'm spare you for that, but in the end, they came up to Lanklaar and Stockholm up here, and they finally cleared the area for German troops. And that sort of ended that fighting in that period. There was still some occasional artillery, but things eased out or cooled down. Here's an interesting photo. The two guys on the left are both sailors or former sailors. Actually, I have a photograph of these two guys in Sherberg when they meet one of them or their former shipmates. So it's quite interesting. If anyone recognizes the two guys on the right, I would love to hear. It's a quite interesting story about how we managed to identify where this photo was taken. Hotel DuPont. I did some searches on the internet, and there's quite a few hotels DuPont. So, but we finally found out it's located just on this side of one of the canals, and it still stands today. Okay, how are we on time, Bill?
Doing fine. Yes, we still have time.
Yeah. I'm killing you with slides here.
They're great.
Okay. So now we have all these casualties, and there was a lot of replacements coming in. So this was a period where there was a lot of changes in the battalion. Whoops. There's music. Somebody needs to mute.
Berg, is your mic's on?
Somebody has music on.
So the host can mute him. whoever the host is.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, there was a worry about what was happening to the battalion at this point. Was a lot of wounded, a lot of key personnel disappearing. As I mentioned earlier, being a battalion on a large battlefield, just 1,000 men, there was always a risk of being, wiped out. Really, 1,000 men is not a big, force, so to speak. So I'll try to, if that fear of what would have happened if they had that much casualties that they would just put into another, regiment or a division. I don't know if the officers ever thought of that prospect, but it was there. And they haven't even come to the worst part, because on Friday the 13th in October, they moved into Germany, and Siegfried Line. The Siegfried Line, I'm sure quite a few of you know what that was, but that was the defense positions that the Germans had dug and built along the border. And there were tank traps, there were mines, wire, hidden guns, everything that you could imagine. So that's what's up next for the battalion. They are attached to 30th Infantry Division, who's for several, maybe weeks, I don't recall, but for a long period been trying to encircle the big city of Aachen. You can't see Aachen on this map, but this is Rusland, which is on a smaller town to the north of Aachen. You have two photographs here. The one on the left is taken prior to the fighting. The one on the right is after. It's not very good, but I wanted to show you. They're quite good actually to explain what happened. So the main road, the Germans had one road into Aachen, and the garrison in Aachen needed to keep that road open to get forces in, to get ammunition in, to get food and everything in and out of Aachen. So the American forces tried to encircle the town, but it was a real struggle. And that last part, to close that last gap, the 99th took part in that action. So on October 16th, they make a big effort. 30th Infantry Division, the 116th Infantry Regiment, and the 99th are coming down this way. And this is the main highway. You can see it go here. You see the same on this slide. These are the same. So they're coming down, the 99th are coming down this way from the north. This is called Hell's Corner down here. At this point, the battalion are split up. 2nd Army Division are coming down this way, together with the 119th Infantry Regiment. C Company is staying put here. B Company is in support of I think it was the 117th on this flank. The front line is following the main road, really. So it's really heavy fighting and a lot of artillery. In the evening on the 16th, they finally managed to link up. The 99th is not directly involved in the link up, but they're in support. That is on the night of the, or afternoon or night of the 16th of October. The day after, A company get the mission to go down into this hollow. There's a hollow where the main road goes, and they get the mission to put up roadblocks down there. That's not a place where you want to be. You have the German troops on this side, American troops here, American troops here, and you are in the middle here. And what happens is there's a miscommunication, and the American troops on that flank is pulling back. And the next morning, there's a big counterattack. And there's, crazy, they're fleeing, and the tanks are just running over all the 99, forces. And I have some pictures. Maybe I can show you. Maybe it's easier to see. Let's see. Here you can see this is the main highway. A bit down the road here, the roadblocks were. The Germans came in from behind the houses here. There's a slope coming, down here. And there was American troops on this side, on the Ravensburg, which you can see here, this hill up here. So they were really stuck down there, and even in the confusion, there was also firing from your own forces coming in. So at this point, the battalion lost once again a lot of men, a lot of killed, and even missing in action. Later on, this mission was called a suicide mission by one of the officers that in 3rd Infantry Division. It was really badly planned, and once again the enlisted men took the brunt of that action. Later that same day, the Germans continued their attack up this road, and that's where John, do you want to tell that story, or?
Well, one of the quests we had, and one of the reasons we've been talking to Antoni with great interest, is my sister-in-law in the 60s asked her father if he'd won any medals. Rita, you want to tell the story? Are you still there, Rita? I hope. Rita, are you there? Maybe.
Yeah, we were studying world wars in school, and Dad had never spoken too much about the war, but I knew that he'd been in the Army in World War II, and I don't know what triggered it, but I came home and asked him if he got any medals in the war, and he said, I don't know. And I wasn't one to let that lie, and so I wrote a letter asking if my father was due to have any medals from the war, and lo and behold, a few months later, a box came with quite a few medals. My sister Helen probably has at least some of them.
If you can see them.
Yeah.
So a big box
That
of
was
medals
quite a
came.
surprise for all of us.
There's a lot more.
Yeah.
So there's a bronze star in there that we've always been curious about how he won that. Because they didn't give that many medals out in the 99th, and so there's the bronze star. Helen's holding it up. The interesting thing was the story, and I think this could be the point where it happens. Like, again, his beloved Jeep that he has such a passion for. He's driving into town now. He's got behind it this a cart that a trailer behind him, and he's carrying a lot of other stuff. When they get down the bottom of the hill, he told me the Germans opened up on him, and he had to swing around the Jeep around. And then as he did that, a lot of his colleagues all piled onto the Jeep, and they started to race back up at the hill. And I mentioned this earlier, the Jeep was prone to overheating. It was air cooled. So about 3/4 of the way up the hill, it stalls. And by all accounts, it's like a half-hour wait before it could restart, kind of deal. Somehow miraculously, he gets it restarted, and they can continue up the hill with this great pile of people on board. And they get over the top, and where they're protected, he climbed out of the Jeep, and he's looking, and the cushion he's been sitting on has got 2 bullets in it. So that, he said, he went a little weak in his knees at that point, and had to relax for a few minutes. But it had been a real close call. But it was always like a miracle that the Jeep had restarted for him. But yeah, so he was not wanting to give us any kind of guidance on this. And then I guess when the 99th was brought back to New York, he was leaving in Brooklyn. He said he could stand on line, but the door out to the street, and he had a couple of nice girlfriends in Brooklyn at the time, and including one who was a maid at the Gabor sisters' house, who had great stories, he said. But that's another thing. And he was just thinking about Brooklyn and everything, and he left. He never stuck around. And so it wasn't like almost 20 years later, Rita writes this letter. And this box, this sort of mysterious box, is sitting here to this day.
Yeah. We need to dig in further into that later on, John. Maybe we can find a citation or something. That would be great.
Yeah, it would solve a big mystery.
Yeah. There's another story I didn't, during this counterattack, there was a lot of replacement officers coming in, and prior to them going into Aachen or into Würselen, D Company got a new officer, and story is that the first thing he did was to gather the men in one of the platoons around him to lecture them on how to stop a tank. And the men would just really, okay, what kind of guy is this? And he had explained to them that you should use a wooden, what do you call it? Some timber to stop the tank, and then you should just jump on top of the tank and drop a grenade in. That was his solution to how to stop a tank. And the men was really frustrated about going into battle with this guy. And on this morning, on October 18th, this guy just leaves the scene. He just flees. And one of the guys told that he had him in his, what do you call it, aim? Is that what you call it?
Sights.
Yeah, sights. And he was considering to pulling the trigger when he saw he ran, but he didn't do it. I don't want to mention his name, but this officer was never seen. He was taken out of line. He was never seen again in the battalion. So he was just with the battalion for a week or two or something like that. But there was a really difficult period with a lot of replacement officers, but also they got good replacement officers as well. So the picture isn't that easy to just say that the replacement weren't any good, because as in any, they were a mixed bag like everyone else. So I'm not taking that with me later on in the story, but the thing is that there was a lot of these replacement that got medals as well. And in some of those situations, that was them helping each other. So my impression of the battalion is that the replacements were welcomed better than in the regular US Army units. There's relationships among replacements, and so the community or the environment in the 99th, I think, was different. I think the key was maybe that they were a small unit. They were tighter knit group. That is why. That's my opinion. But okay. Germany. After the disaster in Germany, I don't know if anyone see the irony in the title here. They were taking out a line and got a, it wasn't really R&R, but they got a patrol and guard, mission to patrol the back area. And down to the south side of the Ardennes, and also down to Bastogne even, and up to Tilf and Liège. But that doesn't last very long, because as we know, the Germans attacked on December 16th. The battalion has their headquarters in a town called Tilf. And early intelligence all along the line says it's Germans are in US uniforms. And it's now the picture that's forming. It's not a good place to be if you're a sailor with a Norwegian accent in American uniform. People were taken aside and they were asking questions about baseball results and stuff like that, to control all, to check if you were really American. A lot of the Norwegians had no idea about American baseball or whatever. So there was a couple of situations where were close calls of being shot, by their own. So, but anyway, Hansen had his problem. He was up here in Tilf with most of the men, but his rifle A company, one of the rifle companies, was spread out in south of the Ardennes. They get a mission to go to Malmedy. See, I don't see that. Yeah, here it is. Malmedy, which is a crossroads really, to stop a German advance in this direction. So he needs to get there as fast as possible. I'll run through this really quickly. There's a lot of details, but first he goes alone together with I think Bjørnstad, his second in command, leaving at once for Malmedy. Some elements from B company follow shortly before the rest of B company and C and D company arrives later at night in Malmedy. As soon as they get to Malmedy, they find out that there's only a small company of combat engineers that's holding Malmedy. And they also hear about the Malmedy massacre. The Malmedy massacre was SS troops that, they shot down defenseless or unarmed American soldiers. I don't recall the number, but it was it about 100 or 150 or something like that? Unarmed American troops that was shot down just outside of Malmedy. That was it the day before or early in the day on the 17th? I don't recall the date, but the ones, some of them that got away still came into line when the battalion came into town. At the same time, there was intelligence reports about spotted German paratroops coming in, along with the reports about Germans in American uniforms. So I don't know if Malmedy lay in the middle of the forest really. So and it's in a sort of a valley. then you have forests all around. And it must have been, I mean, spooky to go into a town and you sort of get the feeling that this town is surrounded by Germans, and not only Germans, but SS panzer troops. And yeah, it's probably hard to imagine today, but we know now that things went all right, but they didn't know when they went in there. So it's sticky.
Yeah, my father-in-law's stories about this part. Late in life, he would talk about this, but they're cut off, and the attack on them is point blank. And he was very hesitant to describe it in detail, but he said they shot the Germans and until they just piled up in front of them. And it was very brutal. And then, like you're saying, they were cut off. And the one night he was on guard duty and he came close to killing it turned out to be a farmer walking in with a cow. I guess, life still went on in Normandy. So the farmer was coming in with this cow at night, and he yelled halt to him, and the guy kept coming, and it was dark and foggy, and he almost killed him, but stopped at the last minute. But his description of the day the weather cleared was really something. I mean, they woke up and the sun was out, and suddenly the sky was filled with planes. But in the woods, the forest surrounding Normandy, there was an intense setup by the Germans of many, many, many anti-aircraft guns. And these knocked down a lot of the planes that were trying to supply them. And then the guys parachuted out of the planes, but the wind drifted them into the German lines. And there was nothing they could do about it. But yeah, when he talked about, toward the end of his life, he would talk about Normandy, and it was as you're saying, the setup was not good, but then it gets extremely intense. And the people that they were coming at them were near fanatical.
Yeah. Here's a picture of, they were preparing on this 17th and 18th. Well, they had a couple of days before anything happened. But the reports were, getting, stickier and stickier, really. And you had also an incident or an incident of a Jeep with coming into town with the Germans in American uniforms, which just confirmed the intelligence that the Germans were, dressed as Americans. So things were, spooky. Yeah. They mined together with the combat engineers. They really, prepared the defense of the town. And in the morning of December 21st, Otto Skorzeny was Hitler's favorite commando. He was almost a character. He had a big scar on his left or on his skin, on his chin, after a sword fight. So he was really, he could have been out of a movie, really. So, but he was a daredevil. Really, he was the one who rescued Mussolini by landing a plane on a mountaintop, and just, so he was a character. He had gotten a mission to dress up his 150 Brigade as Americans. They even painted their vehicles in American, insignias. So on the morning of the 21st, I just have to move things around a little bit here. On the morning of the 21st, can you see the red dot? Yeah. I can't make it bigger. I'm sorry about that.
We can see it. We can see it.
We can see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Up here is Normandy, the town itself. You see the railroad line going here. This was the main defensive line that the 99th were holding at this point. They had some troops on this side of town as well, but this was the main line. B Company was holding that. and D company. Hans's company would probably be, the machine guns would probably be at the entrance here and here. That's just my guessing. There's an underpass here and there's an underpass here. And the picture you saw, this one on this side, this is the railroad embankment. So one of the forward posts here on the nights or in early morning, trucks that was coming down this road with their engine cut off, and it hits one of the mines that is laid out, and they hear cries in German, but they have there's an American vehicle, American uniform, but they're crying for help in German. So then the alarm goes off all along the line. The Germans are really doing a stupid attempt, really, because they're sort of trying to storm this across this field, and they are really massacred really badly, and it continues for several hours. And the Americans also have a new explosive, what do you call it, oh, I can't remember that in English. I'm sorry. There's
proximity fuse.
Yes, that's correct. And that is really effective in terms of, you know, stopping the attack. There are some hairy moments. Some of the guys have told about how they were getting short on ammunition. I don't know if John, if Hans ever told anything about that.
No, most of the story was about how close the Germans came and how they just died right in front of them.
Yeah. It is sort of a really World War I attack on a fixed position, really. And there's been discussion in terms of how, you know, how could a skilled soldier like Scorsini do an attack like that, you know. But it ends well for the 99ers. There's some casualties, but not too bad compared to what has been earlier. But things are, you know, unclear. There's still, you know, reports about tanks moving around. So the next couple of days are really hairy. As we get closer to New Year, things do settle down a bit, and I'm not if this is correct to say that we are sort of going into the second part of the Battle of the Bulge, you know, going from defensive into an offensive period. But the battalion starts to send out patrols to sort of probe and find out where the Germans are. And just over New Year, okay, let's have a look at these pictures before we move on. Here you can see the underpasses. This is this top one. This was blown up back then. This is the original that was back then. This tank was one coming directly at the 99th position on this side. This is from a film which I believe is taken from the embankment during the attack. I can't be sure, but I'm quite confident it is taken on that day. You can see it's quite foggy. So after New Year, they are moved further west to an area called Masta, but also you have how do you pronounce that? Butemont Forest.
Butemont.
Thanks. My French is kind of rusty. this is, if you want to sort of, that's my opinion, if you want to look at some highlight in terms of the skilled, winter combat, how the men in the battalion operated, and their training in Camp Hale come to the help. This is the period, because now there's a lot of snow. The snow came from late December, I think it was 26th of December, and there was getting colder and colder and a lot more snow. So when they were moved to this area, it was deep snow, and you can see from the map here, it's really, really steep hills. The 99th held this area on the top. The Germans held positions down here and on the other side of this river. The objective or the mission that the 99 had during this period was, of course, to hold the line, but also to probe the German lines, to get prisoners, to get intelligence about what forces are in front of us. And there's a lot of combat patrols, and I haven't counted, but I think this is the period where there was given most medals to the 99ers. There's a lot of silver stars, a lot of bronze stars during this period. But they also lose men. There's a lot of short stories and anecdotes I could tell about, but I think we need to move on. But typical winter warfare, deep snow, combat patrols. Yeah, it was a rough period for the men. But things do slow down. There's a big push from the Allied side, and the 99th are taken out of line and sent back to Tilf, where they were prior to the Battle of the Bulge. This really, as we know now, ends the combat period for the battalion. This is the last proper action they have, and they are sent to Barneville. And or do you have something to add about Battle of the Bulge, John, before we move on?
No, I think we've covered it. I mean, it was like I say, it was difficult for him to talk about it, and I'm not so sure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. The sort of combat period ends, but they're still very much exposed to the war and what's going on around them.
Oh yeah. But it's not directly in the front line, so to speak. They are taken out of line and ended up in Tilf first for a day or two, I don't recall, and then they are sent back to Barneville, which is quite close to Sherberg. And rumors are going. Everybody believes now they're going to Norway, but they're not. So there's a long period there in spring of 45 that they're really just staying in Barneville. There's a raid. It's a German raid from one of the islands. That's an interesting anecdote. One of the islands in the English Channel, there's still some Germans holding out, and they were raiding the coastline in France to get, to food and ammunition and stuff, but nothing serious really. it's more serious that they have a terrible accident during training. A mortar round is falling, short and hitting one of the men. Several wounded, and one man was killed. Apart from that, of course, they become a part of the regiment. I forgot to write that up. They become part of the 474th regiment, which is, how should I put it, a regiment. Yeah, there you have the, yeah, Rolf's showing the insignia or the patch. Yeah, thank you. One interesting thing there is when it comes to the 99th is when you having an infantry regiment, you usually name the battalions first, second, and third. But in this case, it was first, second, and the 99th. And I don't know who was the man to thank for that, but it was a way of keeping that identity, I believe. Yeah, as we know, it was at least enough Norwegians left. The identity of the group was still there, and that would serve them well when somebody made a decision to send them to Norway later on.
Well, the force was, I was just looking on Wikipedia, was the 474 part of this Devil's Brigade? Special forces that the US Army had? No, maybe not. Maybe I got it wrong.
Yeah, it might have been, because I don't really know that would be on, they were never in an operation or any,
Oh, okay.
So what happens next is the 99th is sent to Germany, and let's see, my machine is making some trouble here. Okay, they're sent all the way back to Germany, and they're really cleanup work. It's behind lines, German stragglers. Some have told about them going after wanted war criminals. Some have told about the gold transport from Hersfeld to Frankfurt. I might tell that story. I think it was in Hersfeld that they found in some mines, they found a lot of gold and valuable art as well, I think. And all of this was supposed to be transported to a safe place. And it was a big security setup. And the 99 got the transport, the mission to transport it and to guard the transport. Yeah, that's, apart from that, it's not very much happening. Of course, they're combing woods and the villages for weapons and stragglers, but there's no really any combat.
Well, Helen has an interesting story about the Bridget Remagen, right?
Yeah, I believe they, when I was younger, the movie came out of the Bridget Remagen, and I'd gone to see it with some friends, and I came home, my father asked me, well, what'd you go to see? And I told him that, and he says, well, I went over that bridge. So I had just seen this movie, and it was pretty, violent and all this, and I was stunned because I really never even thought about him doing that or being in that kind of position. So I was stunned.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I can't say either way, really. I can't sort of place it in the battalion timeline, really, but you never know at that time. You know, they were split up. The battalion was, you know, not in one place. Could have been. I don't know. It's I don't know where Remagen will be in terms of Regensburg or the distance here. Let's have a look at that later on, shall we? Another mystery to solve.
Yes. Well, we have plenty for, yeah, we have plenty for another talk. So I wanted to just go back and talk a little bit about when they were went to Norway.
Yeah, there we go. I'm jumping right in with some photographs. They arrived in Norway on, was it, let's see. I forgot, 4th of June. King Haakon returns on June 7th. There's a lot of stories to tell about how the men, there was a lot of them. You know, the first thing they did was to call home. But they landed in the evening on June 4th. They were not allowed, well, a few of them was allowed, I think, ashore. But they weren't, you know, leaving the boat or ship before the morning after with vehicles and stuff. So it was a, you know, Norway had been in, you know, been occupied for 5 years, so there was a lot of celebration. And one of the guys told how the first thing he did was to run and jump on the not subway, but is that what you call it, tram? No.
Tram, yeah.
To get back home and to find his girlfriend, because he had been engaged just before he went to sea. So he jumped on the tram to get home. While he's on the tram, he spots his father outside in the street. He just continues up and finally gets home. And after a lot of back and forth, he gets hold of his former girlfriend, and and things were a little bit tricky or awkward initially, but the story ends well. They got married later that summer, and so there's a lot of those stories. And Hans has his own story, how his return was. I think the first relative he gets to meet was his brother Timon, that according to Ove went to Oslo 3 days after they arrived on June 7th when the king returned. So that was his first contact with him for, well, not 5 years, but 6 years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Close to 6 years, yeah. And I see I didn't have time to change that, John. It's not correct that his father had passed away. He passed away in August. So he did get a chance to meet his father before.
Yeah, we have a copy. Well, his story was they were told to drive into town when they first arrive and make a big show. So he drives the Jeep into town and there's a big traffic jam, locking it, real gridlock. So he gets to a phone, he calls home, and of course they don't know what's happened. But then we have a letter here from, one of the relatives had written to the Red Cross asking for an appeal that Hans be given leave because the father was deathly ill. And I think that is granted shortly after here. Some of the other families on the line, maybe they want to add something. They all had memories about this. But the famous line is, "I'm not going to Oslo to see the king. I'm going to see my uncle." You know, and that kind of thing, right? He's an American in the American Army. You know, so it was a very emotional time for them.
Yeah. There was also some sad stories as well. There was one in Hans' company that landed in, and he got the news that his wife had passed away 2 months earlier. He had also 2 children, and he was the first one to get leave in the battalion, just a couple of days after. So he got home to his children, but his wife had just passed away. Yeah, and some came home, found out their relatives had been on the wrong side.
Down there, I should call Marcia and ask her.
So
This is
there were everything, but
Oh,
in general,
Okay. ask her.
there was a lot of parades.
Okay. I think she's with the girls.
Oh,
I was gonna ask
somebody
her.
needs to mute.
Was it this weekend?
I think it is this weekend because Uncle John texted me and he was leaving this past Thursday for South Dakota.
We're listening to you, Joyce. You
Oh, was
need
he?
to mute your
You said Marcia would be with
microphone.
the girls.
Okay.
I mean, you could call her on her cell.
Oh, we need to
You have
mute it.
Yeah.
You need to mute it.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, there was a lot of parades, a lot of partying, but they had a military mission as well, and that was to sort of transport the Germans out of Norway. There was a lot of raids on the different camps to find war criminals. It was a security mission, really, to make the everything, you know, go along smoothly in terms of the arming the German army.
Well, Helen has a good story about her father's ride home on a train when he gets leave.
Well, before this, my father and I had a trip to Norway when I was 18. And we were visiting family, and we were on our train coming home and going back to Tønsberg. And he got off the train because we made a stop, and we had like 10, 15 minutes before the train would start again. And he got off for a moment, and a woman who was sitting near us asked me to go get something. And she spoke in Norwegian and then just assumed I was Norwegian. And I went out, and I think I got her some Freya chocolate or something. So I sat down, my father came in again, and he started speaking English to me, and she was so upset because she thought I was Norwegian. So he told me a story about how when he was there with the army, he was on a train and he was in uniform, and there were 2 women who were staring at him on the train, and they started talking about him and how Americans only drank chocolate. They did not drink anything but chocolate, and everything, was so nice. So he decided he would say something, and he said in Norwegian, he said, "No, we don't just drink chocolate in America." And they were stunned that he understood them. And, "Wow, you speak perfect Norwegian for an American." And he said, "Oh yes, they teach it to us in school." And he was really just having fun because he didn't speak English all that long, and so he told me that story, and because this woman had thought I was Norwegian and they thought he was American, he just remembered that one.
Yeah, his final trip home though is right out of sort of like a Hollywood moment. As he approaches the house, the farm, a group of German trucks pull up, and the Germans are in the truck. They get out and they surrender to him, and he's trying to get home now all these years, right? So he's got sort of an American way about him now. He tells them, no, you don't surrender here. Drive to the corner, make the first right, and just keep driving until you come to a stop sign and you surrender there, right? So, and he says he ran the rest of the way home from there. But it was the final moments were pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's also stories about a lot of the men getting married, and also a lot of the Americans found Norwegian wives as well, the replacements. So yeah, there was it is a nice story, but one thing I always bothered me a little bit is that the story of the 99th has always, the focus has been on their ski training and their parade being a honor guard for the king in Norway, and the OSS link, and quite often the story of the battalion itself and the combat they took part in Europe has been a lesser, focused, had a lesser focus in their story. So I think if you want to sum up the story of the 99, I think it is a lot of sacrifice that was done, and they were a good infantry unit, but that often gets in the shadow of all the things about Roosevelt and the ski training, and yeah. So they deserve to get the story told, what they really went through, not what they were supposed to go through in Norway. So
May I ask a question?
yeah, sure.
How many survived out of that amount of Norwegians in the 99th?
Yeah, they had in total fatal casualties, where I think the number is 52, and not all of them were Norwegians. I have to look that up, but the most part survived. Yeah, there was a lot of wounded, and what we don't know is how did they, how should I put it, the wounds that we can see after the war, we don't know much about that.
How many were in the original unit?
About 1,000 men.
1,000 men.
Yeah,
1001.
Rolf says 1,001.
Yeah, the one was my father. That's why I know that.
Just a quick question here. Phil had to leave. He's one of our members, and he had texted a question, and he was saying he would be interested to learn if, when this Norwegian citizens joined the 99th Battalion, they knew the efforts by the Norwegian government to bolster the Norwegian army, because apparently and this was actually mentioned, I think, in the movie Atlantic Crossing, that the Norwegian government was also trying to recruit Norwegians to join the Norwegian army. Do you know anything about that?
No, not in detail, no, but I do know there was the discussion about, what do you call it, who would decide of these men, who had the command or the position to tell them what to do. I think the Norwegians, or the Norwegian government, really wanted to keep at least these sailors in the merchant fleet. They were really important to the Norwegian government. Other men, I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything about recruitment for Norwegian army, but I know the Navy and the merchant marines. There was actually one of the men in the battalion that had changed his name. He was originally a gunner in the Norwegian Navy, and he deserted in New York and changed his name and signed up for the battalion. And at some point they caught up with him, and he was taken out of line when they were in the Sherberg area. to get back to that point about Norwegian army, I really can't answer that. I haven't heard any active recruitment or fight over the
Well, that
men.
one letter you showed us, the note earlier in the presentation where they didn't want anyone to escape. Norwegian sailors, yeah, that's a pretty telling note.
Yeah, that's the sailors. Yeah.
I mean, the sailors were important to the finances and the war effort. The Norwegian government in exile, is one of the few governments that has its own source of income, and that's the shipping.
So that story, that part of the story is really intriguing, and I love to dig into that even more, especially in connection with that whaling fleet, to see actually how many of the men came from that whaling fleet from that season, 39-40 season, in hunting season. That would be really interesting to find out more about. So,
well, I know 3 months after Hans is enlisted in the U.S. Army, he becomes somehow by automatic act of Congress, he becomes an American citizen. He doesn't actually apply. I mean, so I don't know how that happened, but his citizenship was part of like an automatic thing. Now, you showed some documents earlier where he had clearly applied for some papers. So maybe that was, his citizenship was already in motion. But he has to register for the draft in New York in 1940 for the American.
Yeah,
so
and in December 41, the Norwegian government passed a law that all Norwegian citizens should register, even those who had taken out first papers in the U.S., men and women. So yeah, they were really they were really between, what do you call it in English, a rock and a hard place. Yeah. So there was one guy that managed to go off the grid, so to speak, but he was caught in the end as well. But there's so many layers to that part of the story. You have the stigma, you have the the ethics, the more problem, and it's really difficult for us today to sit and sort of judge in any way. We don't know all the details in terms of how they were thinking. I mean, there was one guy that was torpedoed twice. You can't blame him for not wanting to go out again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody. I want to know, does anyone have a quick question? Particularly people who haven't spoken.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have a question or that. Is the family farm in Stoka still occupied by family members? My wife has a relative who farms in Stoka.
That's an interesting question. The answer is yes, but it wasn't always. They had sold the farm, and then people who had it actually married a member of my family again, so it's back in the family again. I had my 50th birthday party. We all gathered at the old house in Bjarkli in Stokke, and it was wonderful. Yeah, no, it's back in the family again. Yeah. It's called Bjarkli.
Through an active marriage and love.
So it is in the family. Yeah. And we have a huge family because, again, my father was one of 12 children. And there were, I have probably around, I don't know, I have a bunch of cousins probably listening in right now, who there were like 30 of us or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all over the place. Yeah.
I don't know if Ellen, are you still on? Ellen, do you want to share something? I don't know if she's still on. It's getting late in Norway.
We're here.
Wait, you want to say anything?
It's late, but we're here.
Oh, you want to say something from
about the family?
It's fine to listen to all the presentation. We've heard about Hans coming back home, being in Oslo 7th of June. It was a great day in Norway, of course.
And his
So,
brother was asked on the train to Oslo, are you going to meet the king or to see the king arriving? No, I'm meeting my brother. That was more important for him, of course.
Well, we're going to have another talk on the 99th, at least one more talk on the 99th Battalion next year. And we'll be hopefully getting different perspectives along with your perspective. So I'd like to thank everybody, and this will be on.
Bill, maybe before we close,
Sure.
Tony had one more slide, I think, of the 4th of
Oh.
July celebration,
Oh,
which
please,
I think
go
was
ahead.
the 99th has one hell of a 4th of July in Oslo. I think that's the parade for 4th of July.
Yeah, I didn't show this, but I sort of jumped straight to Hans. Here's another one.
Now that's at the
There's,
palace. That's at the palace with the 99th.
And that's King Haakon there. And
That's King Haakon, yeah. And I don't know if you recall the elderly man on the photos where the overpass in Malmedy. This is him right here. This is Tom Scadam. I traveled with him in 2008 down to Malmedy and into Germany and following the battalion footstep. He was then 94 years old, clear as a bell, and he was an officer in C Company, an experience really to be able to travel with him. And this is just one of the guys getting back to the farm. There was a lot of these. There's a lot of these pictures.
Mm-hmm.
There's another one.
Yeah, for these sailors, the homecoming was something special. I mean,
yeah,
circumstances. But the 4th of July also had a big air show, and Hans gets to be the translator for the local radio during the American Air Show at the I guess it's Guatemala maybe airport. So the 4th of July that year was quite a blowout.
Yeah.
In Oslo.
Yes.
Yeah, if I could, my name is Eric Brun. I'm the president of the 99th Educational Foundation that we took over from the 99th Veterans. So we are the direct descendants of them. We have grown our Facebook group from 300 to 1,700 members, and we invite you all to find us on Facebook. We would love to have you come learn more and interact. I'm also a retired lieutenant colonel and have been working on the 99th archives. Antoni and I have exchanged treasures periodically, and I look forward to doing much more of that. But thank you so much, Antoni. It's always a wonder and a beautiful thing to see something you care about so much being presented.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's
And I'll
Eric.
say,
We got one more thing to show you.
His
It's just,
army bag.
she's got her father's army bag
You
here.
can't really see his feet well.
Nice.
There's his original army bag.
Cool.
uniform. His uniform is in
okay.
there.
And I'll do a quick hello too. I'm Olaf Mengi, and I'm in Minnesota. And my grandfather was a captain in the 99th. He was a doctor, and so he and Rolf's father spent a lot of time together. So Rolf, you know my dad, David Mengi.
I sure do. Yep.
That's a great presentation, Antoni, and great data. I'm glad that we were able to.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
here.
you, Olaf.
Yeah.
Great work.
Okay. Any other comments?
Bill, this is Bob Farringer. Tortoise's father was a member of the 99th also.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in Stockholm. We have the whole list of,
Yeah, we have his
we have
whole
his
list
whole
of
diary.
places.
If anybody would be interested, I took pictures of it.
Oh. It looks like we're
Very
gonna
much.
have at least one talk and maybe two talks next year on this.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of stuff that we haven't covered, and
Well, I'd be happy to fill in the gaps on the OSS side of the house. 2 operational groups that jumped into France on 5 different missions. One operational group became NORSO and went to Norway. The other operational group went to China at the end of the war.
okay, yes. Eric, you're on. We definitely going to have a program on that. Can't
Excellent.
miss the OSS. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Say hi to Mr. OSS Society there in DC. I had the honor of presenting for Tortoise there in Fairfax, 4 years ago? So
Sounds
Yeah,
right.
sounds about right.
I think so.
yeah.
Well, back in 1995, they had a big blowout at the Waldorf for the liberation of Norway. And I took my father, he was the president of the Norwegian Seamen's Veterans. And that night, William Colby got a medal. And it was like everybody in the room was saying, what's this all about? Because he hadn't been out of the CIA that long, you know? And the presenter was Celeste Holm, the actress. And it was quite an evening. They also had the guy from the heavy water plant job there. And it was an impressive group of people.
Yeah. Yeah, some incredible stories. And there's actually even a story of a guy who ran for governor of Texas that ties into the 99th. But that's for a future briefing.
Yeah.
And yes, we were trying to cover the sailors.
To answer your question, the 1st Special Service Force, when the Canadians left, it became the 1st and 2nd battalions of the 474th Infantry Regiment. So the senior staff of the 1st Special Service Force became the regimental staff of the new regiment when it formed in January of 45.
I would say you clarified something too, because I maybe had misgivings about this group. I thought they were just kind of a mop-up operation that didn't,
actually
see a lot of
the agreement for that
action.
regiment. The agreement for that regiment goes back to 1943, and it was an agreement between the Brits and the Americans that the Americans would contribute a regimental combat team to go into Norway as part of the Rankin plans. So by late 44, they were trying to figure out where they were going to get one, and the 1st Special Service Force was just sitting there. So they decided to create a new regiment. And the 99th had been part of that plan since October of 43.
Okay, well, thank you. And any last words or before we close up, and hopefully we'll continue on in next year. So
Excellent.
Again, thanks to everybody. And I'll be closing the meeting. And I'll be putting this next couple of days. I'll be putting this on the Washington Lodge YouTube side. So thanks again, and
Fantastic.
have a good evening.
For my
Tschüss.
Yes.
Wiedersehen. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.